welcome to my channel. In this video, if Yoon, I hope you've been doing well. So this video I've been actually kind of excited to make for a while because I feel like I have joined the growing group of people who have been really into horror and are really ready for a horror summer reading month or reading months. And I'm even more excited because I'm not gonna lie, I actually thought summerween was just a Gravity Falls was just a Gravity Falls thing because that was the only time I have ever heard of that word. And I watched Gravity Falls not that long ago. I want to say maybe how long has it been? Earlier 2020s. So like maybe 2022, 2023 is when I watched Gravity Falls. I fell in love. First time I ever heard Summerween. And if you know Gravity Falls, you know it has like it has a lot of weird and new concepts and terms and etc. So knowing how Gravity Falls approaches kind of existing folklore and urban legends and myths, I was like, oh, okay, Summerween's just a Gravity Falls thing because I've never heard of that term in my life. Plus, I think the twins acting confused as to what Summerween was as well didn't help me think that it was actually an existing thing. But it seems to be now because or Gravity Falls coined that term. Either way, it's like growing into its own American thingy now. But in Korea, I don't know how long this idea has existed as well, but if you've lived in Korea or if you like know some Korean culture, you'll know that I can't remember the term for this either, but there are two things Koreans like to do in the summer. One is eating hot foods because that'll help you literally cool down from the sweat. It'll help regulate your temperature by making you sweat. The second thing they love to do is watch horror movies or do like horror experiences or anything to do with horror. They also really like to promote and do during the summer because when you get scared, you get the chills and you shiver, and that's supposed to help you also cool down during the summer. So I really wanted to do a book recommendation video of horror books that are guaranteed to give you the chills during the summer, aka just horror/ghost story books. And oh my gosh, I forgot to bring the books over, so I'm going to actually pull out the physical books that I have. The physical books. Okay, wait, sorry. I will go pull out the books that I have the physical copies of and then show them to you as I recommend them. But I'm gonna go get the books and I'll be back. Okay, so I turned off the lights, so hopefully the lighting is still okay, but I didn't want the glare of the light bulbs to hit the cover of the books. And the camera still has very wide angles, so I'll try my best to like show a close-up or at the very least zoom in. But I have my collection of books right here. Oof. Okay, so let's get started. So these are the physical copies that I have, but I also have a lot of things I read digitally. Let's get started. So a lot of my focus is actually going to be more on kind of ghost horror and whatnot. The first book I would like to recommend is actually Alien Gods by Lee Soo-hyun, and this is translated by Anton Her. So this is the cover. Let me just zoom in super quickly. And this is a super short book, as you can tell from this. It's probably more of a novella or a short story. And this one is part of a collection that I don't know how recent, but a fairly recent collection that Korea did where they had some authors get together and do a Lovecraftian retelling within Korean society. Is taking the Lovecraftian cosmic horror concept with Korean shamanism, and this author creates a story that blends the two. And we follow our main character who a Korean anthropology student. She's studying Korean shamanism and Korean folk traditions. So she's kind of she goes to a lot of shaman rituals. She interacts with a lot of shamans and stuff, but then eventually she gets afflicted with some sort of mysterious illness. And the story kind of goes on from there. But yeah, so very interesting. I had a really good time. If you want something fast, if you want something kind of eerie, kind of creepy, a little unnerving, but short, I recommend Alien Gods. Next, I have one of the two, now three books, but I still recommend these two. So I would like to recommend Strange Pictures by Uketsu. And honestly, I recommend Strange Pictures and Strange Houses. They're both very short books and they're both very, very creepy. They're not supernatural ghosts, but the author does such a good job establishing like this really creepy kind of scary atmosphere throughout the books, especially Strange Houses, because the thing is, I do prefer Strange Pictures as a plot compared to Strange Houses. But I think I will say the atmosphere of Strange Houses is just a lot creepier and actually kind of scary compared to Strange Pictures. And I find it so impressive how the author managed to do that by just having one floor plan, like where there's just something that doesn't make sense with a floor plan, and that's kind of the entire focus of the story. And I just find that so impressive that what that an architect that a floor plan could create such a creepy atmosphere. And I know that I'm like holding on to Strange Pictures, but I honestly would recommend Strange Houses more for that creepy, like tense atmosphere, especially the manga adaptation of Strange Houses. I had actually read that first before I realized it was originally a book, especially written by the same author as Strange Pictures. But the manga does such an amazing job. Like, that's honestly, if you have the opportunity to read the manga over the book for Strange Houses, I highly recommend doing that because the visuals of the characters' imaginations and the visualization of their theories, of the floor plan, just really elevate that sense of creepiness and horror as to what they think the floor plan means. And the artist just does such a great job delivering those sensations to the reader. So if you have the opportunity, definitely read Strange Houses, the manga adaptation, over the book, because I genuinely got freaked out when I was reading the manga adaptation. It didn't help that I was reading it at nighttime, and I think I might have been home alone. So you never really want to read about a really creepy floor plan with really well illustrated visualization when you're home alone at nighttime in your house. So, I mean, if you want to, I would recommend you read it like that for the ultimate fear effect. But yeah, so it's definitely Strange Houses manga adaptation. If you still want something creepy but not like too scary and a bit more classically mystery, then go for Strange Pictures instead. But yeah. And the next book that I would like to recommend is actually a book that I read the arc of, I think, last year. I really enjoyed it. It was called How to Survive a Horror Story by Mallory Arnold. And this one, I'm still proud of how I pitched it in my reviews, like my Goodreads review. But so I will say it here. I pitched it as if Charlie and the Chocolate Factory met Monster House. If that doesn't intrigue you, I don't really know what else I could say about this book that would. Basically, we have our main character who finds out she was written in the will of this recently died, what's the word? Not infamous, like renowned horror author. In the book setting, he was considered the king of horror books. And we find out he recently passed away. She finds out she's in his will and she's invited to go to the reading of his will at his mansion. She is confused. Also, I'm saying she because I don't remember her name. So it'll be either protagonist or she, her. She doesn't understand why because she's never really interacted with him except for maybe this one time. But even then, she didn't think there was anything super poignant about that meeting for her to be in, added into his will. And she is currently a struggling author. I don't know if she's only released one book or if she hasn't even debuted, but she's trying to write a story or she's trying to get one of her books published, and that so far hasn't been going so well. So she's even more confused because she's not necessarily integrated into this author circle or community. But she decides that there's nothing really much to lose, so she goes, and then she sees that there's been like a lot of other really well-known horror authors. She recognizes all of them because they're all pretty well-known in their niche of horror stories that they tend to write. No one really knows why they've been invited. Like, they like to think it was because they were close with the guy, with Mortimer, who was the author that died, or, you know, etc., etc., but they're not very confident in why. I also forgot to mention this is a multi POV, so we do get the POV chapters of some of the other characters throughout the story, but our main protagonist is the one who doesn't know why she's there. So they get together and they're like chatting, they're mingling. Our main character feels a little out of place. She's not sure why she's here, especially with these other big shots. They kind of don't know why she's there, but they're intrigued by her all the same. And then the person in charge of reading the will comes in, and I think basically to get like anything out of the inheritance, they have to win playing puzzles in the house. And they're like, oh, classic Mortimer, like classic horror novel setup. But despite them taking it so shallowly, it turns out it's actually very, very real and very, very dangerous, and that the house almost seems alive and it's hungry. And then we just end up exploring the other characters, their reaction to the situation, just what these games in the houses forces them to confront and what it reveals among everyone. So it is very, it's not, I wouldn't say it's creepy or that scary, but it does try to play around with the horror genre. But I did really like the questions and the questions it brought up while it was navigating the genre, trying to subvert it, trying to navigate it, trying to kind of interrogate the genre. And it wasn't so much the genre, I guess, but rather what the genre lets people do. And it just brings up questions of who gets to speak the truth, when there are two conflicting stories, like which one comes out on top. And it was a fun book. Like I said, it kind of has, it's not super scary in any sense. It kind of just gives you the chills when it comes to what it's kind of questioning throughout the book, which again was the concept of truth and the concept of kind of retelling a story. If you want to ease your way into reading some horror, I would recommend this. And another book I would recommend is Home After Dark by Riley Sager. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the biggest fan of this author. I think of all the books I've read, which also hasn't been that many because I'm not gonna keep making myself read an author I'm not the biggest fan of. I still think I only really enjoyed Home After Dark. The reason why I liked Home After Dark is even though I didn't like the ending, I did really enjoy how up until the ending, it was written so well as if you were reading a horror movie. And as somebody who can't is really bad at seeing the visuals of horror, like I can read horror things just fine. I can't see them very, like I'm very weak to actually seeing the visuals of it. So horror, manhwa, manga, and movies, TV shows, anything that gives a visual, I'm so bad at reading, but I still love the stories. So I have no problem reading the books. I just can't really see the visuals. So for somebody who struggles with that, with like watching a horror movie, it was so much fun reading a book that's basically a horror movie in book form. And it was also written and delivered really well. Like I got a little scared at times. It had fun written jump scares in a sense, and it just built up the story. It just built up the plot really well. Again, it just everything kind of did end up falling short for me once we got to the ending and seeing how things were resolved. But other than that, like 85% of the book, really enjoyed reading it. I thought it had a very classic horror movie feel to it. So if you're also bad at watching horror movies but you still like reading it, I would recommend Home After Dark as well. And I realized I didn't give a premise for Home. Basically, our main character, I can't remember, I think her dad. So the thing is, the main character has kind of lived in a weird limelight for most of her life. When she was younger, she had lived in this house with her family, and they ended up leaving it, and the dad wrote a story about it, and that went viral, and then etc etc etc. She doesn't like kind of the moniker that followed her from that, so she ends up being estranged from her dad, and then after, I think he dies in the story, and she realizes that in his will or things of ownership, she sees that the house is still under his name. So she's kind of like, why the heck why didn't he sell the house? So she goes to the house, and then she starts experiencing the same things that she had that were written down in the book. And that's like, classic haunted house story. I have two other books I'd like to recommend. I have Midnight Timetables by Patitucci and The New Seoul Jelly Park Massacre by To Yeun. I think it's Yeun. And they're both translated into English. Midnight Timetable, classic collection of ghost stories. I really enjoyed most of them. I think there was one that I was very confused about. I really enjoyed reading the author's note at the end, where she's kind of talking about, well, it's called The Joys of Ghost Stories, and later near the end she kind of writes what inspired her to write a certain ghost story surrounding that setting. I really enjoyed it. It does give you things to think about. It's a very easy, very thrilling read, and the premise that surrounds this collection of stories is that our main character, or our narrator at the very least, they are newly hired in something called the institution, and the institution deals with supernatural and haunted phenomena in Korea. So as they work in this building, they hear a lot of ghost stories that belong to items that the institution currently owns. And we just kind of learn how those items came to be haunted, or just the backstory behind those haunted items. And then the New Seoul Jelly Park Massacre, that one is probably the weirdest horror book I've ever read. Honestly, it's quite creepy and it is very unnerving. It gives you a lot to think about, but you're also kind of confused about what to think about. It's that kind of weird horror. So what happens in this one is it's set in an amusement park in Korea. And I picked this up because I love me a good creepy amusement park story. This didn't do so much on the amusement park wasn't necessarily the setting. I think it was more of a way to, it was a very convenient location to have all these different types of people be in the same place, and also to make it make sense to have the treat that they end up having. But kind of what happens is that there's these different groups of people who are all at the amusement park on the same day. We follow a couple on the verge of breaking up, and then we have a young girl whose parents are always fighting, and she kind of took this trip to the amusement park as her last chance to maybe help them reconcile the relationship. And then we follow a financially struggling mom and daughter, where the mom is taking her daughter to the park, even though because she doesn't want to give her daughter happy memories, but they are financially struggling. And then we follow a cat, and then we also follow an employee at the amusement park. Is that everyone? So we have all these groups not entirely coming across each other. We might see a glimpse of some of them in one person's point of view, but not everyone, etc., etc. And they're all trying to have a good time as one does in an amusement park, but they're all kind of not able to do so. But then what happens is that there's some really mysterious, unrecognizable figure who's going around and passing out these jelly packets, promoting it as a new treat, and promising that if they eat it, whatever they like, the thing they desire most will come true. So we see how the people's situations kind of tempt them into having those jellies, but then we end up seeing the very weird and horrific consequences after they do so. So it is a really weird horror book, but it also gives you so much to think about in regards of trying to understand the characters, trying to understand their actions, trying to think about what the jelly, you know what I mean? I was disappointed in the fact that the horror didn't rely on the actual amusement park, but I thought it was such a good, like, weird horror book. And also it's set during the summer, like everyone's hot, it's sweating, they're out in the amusement park. Perfect time to read it. So the next book I would like to recommend is one that I reread recently called The Dark Maidens by, I don't remember, I think Rico. And this one is like completely not horror, but I feel like the twist just leaves you with like the biggest shock and the chills. Rather dark what happens at the end of the story and like the way everything comes together. So the plot for The Dark Maidens is that it's set in an all-girls Catholic school set in Japan, and the chairman's daughter, who is a student there and like the most popular girl in school, everybody loves her, everybody aspires to be like her. She reopened the previously closed literature club in the school, and it's become like this really exclusive social status like club where you can only go in if you're invited by her. And she is found dead in the beginning of the story. She's found dead on a laying on a bush holding onto lily of the valley flowers. So obviously people are freaked out, like this girl was so influential in the school. But then apparently rumors started to grow that it was somebody in the literature club that did it. So now the literature club is under scrutiny, but the new president, she's like, let's hold one last, or let's hold one like mystery stew meeting. And so they have this tradition where they get together and they bring any sort of ingredient that they want for the mystery stew. It can even be inedible, it just has to be sanitary. And as they eat this mysterious stew, without ever knowing what it is until the end, they also share their own original written short story. So for some reason, the new president decides to hold one, and the theme is who killed their president. And she's like, I think she said something like, with the rumors that it's someone from our own club members, let's just try to get down to the wow, what is the end of that phrase? She's just like, let's just try to figure it out ourselves. So every member presents their own original story of their relationship to the president and who they think did it. First, it was so interesting because you see how so many people see kind of the same situation and interpret it differently, and like we see how other people, how members are accusing each other by their own interpretation of the situation and kind of like what they were given and what they took from that. So it's very interesting. Again, I think it kind of ties back to How to Survive a Horror Story, where it's like when there are more than one truth to a story, which one comes out on top, or how to know which one is like more truthful or the actual truth over the others. So it's very interesting to see. It's not, I don't think it's like purposeful manipulation, but it is so interesting to see how people are trying to convince each other of the fact that their story is true. So that was already an aspect I really enjoyed. But then to see the big reveal of everything at the end was quite shocking, and honestly something that does give you the chills. And what else was I gonna say about this? I will say it was really weird to see such, I don't know how I had missed this the first time, but it was weird seeing such intense Japanese nationalism for the one chapter. And when I read it, I was like, of course the one non-Japanese character's chapter has the most Japanese nationalism in it. So that was very off-putting to come across, but either way, it's still interesting to see how each member presents their own story. So the next one is actually one where I filmed the reading vlog and I'm currently working on editing it right now. But I really, really recommend and really enjoyed The Executioners 3 by Susan Dennard. If you've been watching Widow's Bay and you really liked Widow's Bay, I think you'll enjoy The Executioners 3 to a certain degree at the very least, because I think it shares a lot of similarities with the show. It has, small town, supernatural mysteries, a bit of a skeptic main character. And really, honestly, I thought it was very funny. I thought it had a really good blend of humor. So the thing is, our main character, Freddie, is an aspiring, what's the word? Law enforcement. She has the desire and she's been working on her skills of doing so. And at first she hears these mysterious kind of uncomfortable sounds in the forest. She thought was murder, or at least something very dangerous was happening. It turns out their rival school was having a party, so she got them all busted and got them all jailed. So she's kind of become a bit of a minor celebrity in her school now, but she also ends up stumbling across a dead body like a few days later in that very forest. So she's like, okay, so something did happen. And the thing that throws her off is that the local law enforcement claims it was a suicide, but she was like, from what she had seen, there's just absolutely no way it could have been a suicide. So she kind of starts to investigate. She gets entangled with somebody from the rival school, and then she starts to kind of dig into, well, her dad who passed away's past and the town's history. Starts to realize that something weird is going on in the town, and there's some more disappearances, there's more people acting weird, there's a bit more deaths, and she's kind of like, something is going on in this town and it ties back to the town's history. So very, very strong connected elements, I would say, with Widow's Bay, like, town history, a small town, supernatural occurrences, skeptic main character, but also I think it has a really good amount of humor, not just a good amount, but well delivered humor. I found myself just giggling or laughing at the main character. She is really the main source of it. I think her inner monologue and her reactions to the situation just were so funny and just really elevated the story. If you have the opportunity to read it, I've been reading this Korean web novel, same author of Debut or Die. And it's honestly so good. I love it so much. It's actually so freaky at times, and it can be, I don't recommend reading this at night, which I have done several times and I regret it every time. But basically the premise for that one is that our main character is a huge fan of this wiki, of like this creepypasta wiki forum website, that he loves to read ghost stories, and he's tried writing a few, but it's like a really well developed public wiki, And basically, the wiki itself is kind of a reimagined Korean society in which there are the creepy pastas run amok, and there are like three factions that respond to it differently. The one, and then our main character ends up getting transmigrated into that world, and he gets transmigrated into one of the factions as a new employee. And the faction that he gets transmigrated into is a pharmaceutical company that, well, what is the that kind of farms these creepy pastas to collect essences, and that essence is what they use to create their medicine. And like they create normal standard medicine that is still really effective, but then they also kind of go into the more supernatural of like healing potions, etc., etc. So our main character has to constantly go through these creepy pastas and survive and kind of like win or solve them in order, and like successfully escape in order to collect essences. But the thing is, he's a huge coward. He is like me in that he can't see visuals, but he loves reading it. So what he decides to do is he decides to speed run. So thankfully, a lot of the creepypastas he's been entering are creepypastas he's already read from the wiki. So with that knowledge, but also his really debilitating fear of these things, he like speed runs through so many of them, but then that ends up making him even more impressive of an employee. So then he starts having to go into harder ones, but he still manages to speedrun. So he's really digging himself into a deeper grave. That is the premise of the story. It's just such a really gripping story. So if you have the opportunity to read it, I recommend it. It's so good. But yeah, so that was it for my digital recommendations. And now let's go back to the physical books that I have. It's only like 4 more, so bear with me for just a little bit longer. I would like to recommend And the River Drags Her Down by Ji Hyun-yoon. This one is a blend of emotional and horror. So the premise of this book is that our main character, her older sister, who was basically her caretaker since a very young age because their mom died when she was young, was recently found dead and have been drowned. And she is kind of spiraling from that loss because not only her older sister, but basically the one who's been there her whole life and has been taking care of her whole life is gone. And she is struggling to accept the fact. So then one day she kind of does what was always what she was always told not to do, because her and her sister and their mom, so like the woman of their family, have some sort of ancestral magic where they can revive the dead through a certain ritual. And their mom had always warned them to never do anything bigger than small animals. So really the only thing they've been kind of using that magic on was their pet rat, who's been revived several times throughout the years. But then because the grief gets too much for our main character, she ends up reviving her older sister. And at first, it seems like the ritual went perfectly. She's having a great time with her sister. Her sister seems to be having a great time being revived. But then, as time goes on, something starts to go wrong with both the main character and her older sister. The town, for some reason, starts having a never-ending rain. Her sister is just hungry all the time. She seems to be fixated on something that the main character never even knew was something she had been thinking about when she was alive. And like I said, our main character is starting to deal with the consequences of not only reviving a human, but keeping her constantly revived. What she knew of her relationship with her sister and what she knew of her sister, and just their house is starting to be distorted. Something is just starting to rot, basically. She's kind of having to come to the terms of what really was the relationship of what she knew of her sister, and the fact that who is her sister right now. It deals with the emotional aspect of loss, of grief, of healing, but then it still does maintain the very classic murikishin, or like Korean ghost movie visuals and plot lines. it's so vivid, but it's also quite emotional. So I guess if you're kind of wanting a bit of a sad horror book, I would recommend this one. But also, if you want to read something that just really pretty strong delivery of like the traditional Korean ghost movies, I also recommend this one. The scenes where ghostly things would happen, I thought were written so well and so creepy, and just like I could see this as a Korean ghost movie. I honestly would love to see this animated instead of live action because I think this animated would be so freaking cool. For the last three books, or two and a half, you'll see why. I actually have a classic recommendation here. Always do recommend would do like to recommend Frankenstein and Dracula because I love Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite classics. And Dracula, I mean, classic vampire. How can you not read that for like Halloween or summerween, or just if you want something kind of horror or gothic? This one I feel like maybe not a lot of people know, but if you're looking for a classic to read for this summer, I do recommend The Monk by Matthew Lewis. I read this, I think 2 years ago for a summer class, and I remember that almost everyone really enjoyed this book because it's really fun. Here, okay. It has a lot of dark themes, as is the case with the gothic genre. I think so. I personally don't think I've read a lot of gothic classics, surprisingly enough. But this one does have, I would recommend looking into the content warnings, but this does have things like sexual assault. It's not explicit, but it is very heavily implied. And I think, yeah, I don't think it goes into details, but it's very heavily implied that that's what happens. Look up content warnings if just in case before you head into reading this book. But despite the dark themes, I think this book was so much fun to read. It's not fast paced. It's very dramatic, and it does read like a telenovela in the sense, or like a makjang drama. The way things just start stacking and stacking and stacking, and the way things escalate so quickly, it is a very thrilling read. The center of this book is mainly just it's just criticizing kind of performative morality, because our main character, the titular character, is a monk, and he's a very well renowned and highly praised monk. But then we realize that despite being a monk, he kind of doesn't actually care about the church's teachings and the values of the religion that he's kind of teaching and preaching to others. So we see how he's very easily led into temptation is part of the critique of the book, and we just see how the escalation is very thrilling and again telenovela like, but then we see kind of what the author is wanting to say about the way things escalate. So a very fun but dark gothic classic. So I do recommend this one if you're looking for a classic to read this summer. And then for the last novel I will recommend, I thank you guys for sticking with me this really long video. I try not to make it so long, but I have a problem. Anyways, for my final book recommendations, I would like to recommend Kaleidoscope of Death. I have with me volume 1 and volume 2, and the premise for this is also going to be a bit of a doozy. Please bear with me. So this is a Chinese web novel that's been officially translated to English and published. So this one, if you're not aware of Chinese web novels, one concept that, well, first of all, it's danmei, so it's BL, but one concept that exists throughout web novels that I've only really seen for Chinese web novels is something called unlimited flow. And what... Oh, wait, battery's running out. Oh, it's still running. No more mic, sorry about that. But the Kaleidoscope of Death, so this is called a concept, something called unlimited flow. And basically, an unlimited flow web novel is It differs, so I want to say there's some similarities to the genre of quick transmigration, where okay, if somebody knows unlimited flow better than what I'm saying here, please feel free to correct me, because this is from what I've gathered from reading unlimited flow, but not actively like finding people who know that genre and seeing what they describe or define unlimited flow as. So from what I've seen, unlimited flow tends to go hand in hand with thriller and or horror. I've seen it mainly with horror. I haven't really seen it with any other genre. If it's any other genre, I think it tends to become a quick transmigration story. Basically, I feel like I'm gonna get this so wrong. The unlimited flow genre or trope is where our main character kind of gets stuck in maybe like a pocket dimension, or they get stuck with or in something and they're forced to kind of constantly go through different puzzle worlds or mystery worlds or etc, etc. And basically unlimited flow means they do this non-stop. Most of the time there is a stop, or there is a way to leave this pocket dimension where they're forced to constantly go through many mini worlds, survive and get out, but it's normally it takes a very long time to be able to achieve that, which is why also they're very unlimited flow. But basically most of the time with the horror ones I've seen, the unlimited flow is that they'll either get transported to a pocket dimension because they were like randomly selected, or they had some random qualification and they get sucked into this pocket dimension and they're kind of forced to become a player of sorts. And basically their responsibilities as a player is that they have to enter these mini worlds or alternate, like these mini contained worlds where there's like a boss in each of them somehow, and they have to survive. They sometimes have to compete against other teams or players, and they have to win in order to leave. And the way to win can differ depending on the novel's unlimited flow. But then most of the time with these, they can also collect like a cash reward of sorts or points, and then that lets them eventually be able to purchase the thing to permanently leave or etc. So there's different conditions to be able to completely leave this unlimited flow that they're stuck in. And for Kaleidoscope of Death, this one has the conditions of going through 12 doors and passing and surviving all 12 doors. If you pass your 12th door, you are able to make a wish, and it can be literally any wish in the world and it can be granted. So what happens here is that our main character, one day he leaves the bathroom, but then he realizes that he's not in his house anymore. Instead, he's in this hallway where there's like 12 doors, but all but one are locked. So he basically has no choice but to go through the only unlocked door, and then he ends up in some sort of winter region, and he's like, what the heck is going on? Where am I? What is this? And he learns that he's become pulled into the thing of 12 doors, and he needs to, so the conditions to pass each world is that he needs to follow the rules that the ghosts set, and he has to be very careful to not trigger getting their attention in a negative way, whether that's through breaking the rules, and he has to be able to find the key to the door, to the exit door, and then he also needs to find the exit door. But then there are two rewards you can get. You can get a reward for being the one to find the key, and then you can get a reward for being the first one to leave the door. It was either leave the door or finding the door. Two rewards, and the rewards are normally hints to your next door to help you like research and prepare ahead of time. And this is mainly like survival horror. The interesting thing is that it's not entirely mystery. There is this sort of mystery in that by continuously living in the door and like learning and figuring out the ghost boss's like rules, the story of the door itself, they eventually kind of are able to deduce where the key would be and where the door would be located. So they have to follow along the ghost story to be able to figure out how to get out. In a sense, it's very similar to Goedam Chulgeun, where to escape and to survive, you have to play along with the ghost story. But yeah, is that considered unlimited flow? Anyways, Kaleidoscope of Death, I do recommend it. I feel like some are scarier than others, some are creepier than others, some are really like uncomfortable in how gory it is compared to others. But it is, I will say, I do recommend Goedam Chulgeun more than this one. I'm not gonna lie, but this one is very fun for if you're wanting to read several ghost stories but with kind of the same characters. I recommend it. Unfortunately, as of right now, they only sell physical copies, but I think they're gonna start doing ebooks soon, so hopefully, you know, that becomes a possible way to read it. And I got volume 2 because I was only planning on getting volume 1 and whichever volume was gonna have the 10th door, because those 2 doors were my favorite arcs. But I saw the cover for volume 2 and I was like, it's too pretty, I need to get it. Because first of all, I do like the dust jacket artwork, but the naked art is also just as beautiful. Honestly, I love how it's really hauntingly and eerily beautiful. And then, oh, this one is so pretty. Like, look at that. Yeah, so those were the books I really enjoyed recommending to you guys. I hope some of these books caught your attention and that you give them a read, because they have been really fun and I think they are just some of the perfect books to read this summer, to give you the chills, to give you the shivers for a summerween. I did try keeping these mainly more to ghost horror stories. I thought some of the other ones were just too good to not recommend as well. But yeah, that was it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope even one book caught your attention, and I hope you guys have a really fun horror summer filled with chills, shivers, and fear. I hope at least one of these books caught your attention, and if you're down for it, I hope you guys have a really fun summerween, a really fun summer filled with horror, chills, and the shivers. And I will see you guys for the series of reading vlogs I'd like to do where I read horror books during the summer. But yeah, so that was it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.